You're listening to Observations, a podcast where we talk about democracy, how it works, and how it could work better. I'm your host, Lily Russell-Jones. Dozens of local councils have been given the opportunity to request a delay to upcoming local elections. The government has given 63 councils until the 15th of January, the end of next week, to request a delay to local elections set to take place in May. The idea is that this will free up capacity so that councils can focus on local government reorganisation. While some councils argue that delaying would be a sensible move, which will allow them to free up capacity and focus on the smooth running of local services while they deliver reorganisation, critics argue that elections could go ahead as planned and say councils have a democratic duty to ensure constituents have their say at regular intervals. Today, I'm joined to discuss this by Peter Stanyon of the Association of Electoral Administrators, an organisation which encourages the consistent and efficient running of elections. Thank you for joining me, Peter.
It's my pleasure.
Were you surprised to see the government giving councils this chance to request a delay to May elections?
Yeah, more in terms of the timing. It was very late on after the minister had said that the elections were planned to go ahead. We knew about the combined mayoral authority elections being postponed or deferred, I should say. But when the news came out with regards to the local council elections, it was just before Christmas. It was a bit of a surprise. And obviously it's now down to those local authorities whether they wish to consider and make a request to defer those elections until later on in the cycle.
And could you tell listeners about the Association of Electoral Administrators, what it does and who it represents?
Yeah, we represent those who deliver the elections. So the electoral administrators in the councils who push the buttons, move the paper around, make sure polling stations are in place, arrange the count details, basically giving the returning officers the ability to do their statutory duties. So we represent those over 2,000 members, both in assisting government in terms of their policy directions, but also assisting the Electoral Commission and delivering training and things ourselves to make sure the electoral community is as best prepared as it can be.
And why might councils be struggling to deliver local elections alongside local government reorganisation?
It's a difficult one. I think it's on the wider context of local government because for a significant period there's been pressure, both resource-wise, money-wise, staffing-wise. As far as the elections are concerned, the plans are to continue, depending on which local authority you're in. The fact the local authority itself has to come forward with its plans for that reorganisation down the line will be sucking resource out of certain areas. But whether that directly applies to the elections teams is really down to each individual local authority. And, in the areas elections are taking place, they will take place because the teams are being prepared to do so within the timetables that have been long set.
And could you briefly explain what will happen to the councils which are being reorganised? Because this is quite relevant to elections. Lots of smaller councils might be absorbed into larger ones, and we could see the overall number of councillors being cut and some councils sort of ceasing to exist in their current form.
Certainly councils will cease to exist in their current form. The size of councils, the shape of councils, no one knows at this stage because clearly submissions have been made for the fast track areas. There are other areas that are going forward now with their particular plans. It's down to consensus of opinion, but ultimately become a Secretary of State decision in terms of what the new framework will look like. But if you just look back in recent history, places like Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole was 4 authorities, I believe, 3 or 4 authorities, that now is one larger area. Buckinghamshire was certainly 4 authorities, it's now one larger area. So it's about the argument for the unitarisation of authorities, taking the county element out from the district, merging them together, is to do with efficiencies, is to do cost savings, it's to do with the fact that individual residents will be liaising with their council, not 1 or 2 different levels of councils going forward. So there's a huge argument in terms of whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. But as far as the actual delivery of the electoral process is concerned, the elections will still take place to whatever body it is, delivered by however many administrators it's required to actually deliver for those new individual local authority areas. But what that framework will look like, I don't think anyone knows at this stage.
Okay, and what are you hearing from members in terms of how the process of reorganisation is going? Do you understand it to be something that's particularly resource intensive inside some councils, or is it something going on in the background?
It's again a bit of a jigsaw across, depending on the individual authorities, but it is definitely resource intensive. There are no two ways about that because there's an awful lot of background information needed. But again, if I focus in on the electoral side of matters, just think of somewhere like Hampshire, for example. Some authorities elect by thirds, some elect by all-out elections. Some authorities have significant parish councils, some don't. There's a real mishmash. What are the cycles of elections and things? They are all the things that will be testing the mettle of those on the electoral side, on the governance side of local authorities, to make sure that when the new authorities come into being, you can actually elect to them in the first place, and on the wider perspective, then govern them going forward in terms of what the council looks like in that way. So again, it is definitely resource intensive, but we as an association, alongside colleagues in MHCLG and the Electoral Commission, but primarily ourselves, have been trying to pick the brains of those who've been through this process in the recent past to share that with the wider electoral community to make sure that they understand the sort of questions to ask, the challenges ahead, and then make sure that that transition to whatever those new authorities look like is as smooth as possible for everybody involved in the process.
And given that we don't know exactly what the new unitary councils might look like, as you said, we might not know how many councils will be included, be absorbed into sort of larger groupings and things like that. Does it seem sensible to you then to delay elections?
It's a difficult one to consider because in certain areas it was county council elections were deferred from last year. So is it right to again defer them a second time? It's the argument between the democratic viability of a local authority. You balance in certainly in recently in the trade press in one local authority. There's both sides of the arguments given about the cost savings to not running elections against actually, but then that means that your old councils, when does democracy have to take place to make sure there isn't that democratic deficit? So it's an argument that is really a policy argument. It's a political argument. All that electoral administrators and returning officers want is to get that certainty. Are we actually going to the polls on the 7th of May or not? Because the time is now ticking. It's only the end of March when notice of election goes up, and a lot of work needs to be done in terms of the delays in those areas if that is indeed what happens.
Okay, well, let's look at some of the numbers. So the Observations podcast contacted dozens of the councils out of the 63 which have been given this option to request a delay. We've heard from 28 councils, 4, including East Sussex County Council, West Sussex County Council, Preston City Council and Cheltenham Borough Council, said that they will be requesting a delay to local elections. But 12 councils have said that they want elections to go ahead as planned, including Norfolk County Council, and 12 has said they have not yet reached a decision, so they're waiting to have a conversation with councillors this week or next week to decide what to submit to government. But do you know why there is a split between councils who are struggling to deliver these local elections alongside reorganisation and the others which seem to think they do have capacity for both?
Again, it's down to each individual local authority, and I do think a lot of this comes down to that argument about resources versus the fact the local authority may not be there in 1 year, 2 year, 3 years time. So it's a tough one to call because we know that money is tight, and that is really the driving force behind those things. Certainly, there were some figures put in again in the trade press today that sort of mirrors the figures that you found yourself. But I find it quite interesting that a number have actually already said no, we are not going to defer. They believe the democratic need to give the electorate the chance of deciding what their local authority is for the time being is more important than the savings that may well come forward. So it really is quite difficult to put a finger on why some authorities are going one way and some are going the other way in terms of the size of complexity and the like. It's a local political decision when it comes down to it.
Okay. And do you have any expectation of the number of councils that you think will be seeking a delay overall?
No, only what's been reported in that effectively we know that 3 authorities have said that they are not going ahead. 5 have included it in their submission as part of those 8 that were being reported today. And there's 16 on this in the list not disclosed. So there's lots of things in there. 15 are saying they're probably going to go ahead. Or 20, I beg your pardon, 24 are saying they're going to go ahead. So at the end of the day, it's a difficult field. in some respects, is quite reassuring from a democratic perspective. There's so many of that 63 have actually come forward already and said we are running elections, because that is the democratic side of things. Others have taken a decision, I think, for local reasons why they wouldn't go ahead. So it's a really tough one to call, where you've got one side against the other on this sort of argument.
And do you think that it's a decision that should have been left to councils rather than the government making a blanket decision about whether to delay or go ahead? Just thinking, the leader of Essex County Council made a statement about this where he said that it should actually be up to the government to cancel elections, not councils. So perhaps feeling like the buck has been passed on to councils who might have been put in a difficult position because of reorganisation to then be the ones to say, OK, we need a delay. It kind of puts the responsibility on each individual council.
Far be it for me to comment on passing the buck, but I think it's the government has put themselves in a very difficult position, I believe, because of the fact that it's not an all-out, like back in 1972, which was the last major reorganisation of local government. Everything happened at once in one fell swoop. This isn't the case. It's more of a let's invite local authorities to consider the changes. This is a byproduct of that, I think, at the end of the day. It would be far, far easier if there was one size fitted the whole sector. But it would be a very brave decision the Secretary of State would come to say that we are cancelling elections in 63 areas while we do that reorganisation. So it's a really tough one. But I think, to be fair to local authorities, in terms of the decision they've got to come to, it will have to be a decision well thought through as to what are the benefits of deferring or actually going ahead. So in some respects, there are positives that a local decision is being made rather than Whitehall making a call in that way. Sorry, a very non-committed answer on that one. Apologies about that.
No, that's fine. Good to hear your thoughts on it. Peter, one of the arguments in favour of delaying is the costs, because these new bigger councils are supposed to be up and running in the majority of cases by April 2028, and then elections for those are expected in May 2027. So West Sussex County Council has made the argument that if it held an election in May 2026 and then a unitary council election in May 2027, followed by a mayoral election in May 2028, the cost of that would be £9 million to the Sussex taxpayer. So do you think there's a legitimate argument against holding local elections this year because of the costs associated and the fact that there will then be more elections potentially the following year?
That's the decision they've come to. I would turn that on its head slightly and say, what is the cost of democracy? I think it's fair to say that there is a balancing argument in terms of democracy isn't cheap. So whether you have one election, 5 elections, 10 elections over a period, I would be being a Democrat myself. I would actually rather spend that money and make sure that the elections take place, because ultimately then it comes down to the political will of those in the areas to be seen in terms of the bodies that govern them. But again, it's a really tough one to call because, as I say, democracy isn't cheap, and every efficiency is brought into the process. It comes more to the wider modernisation type arguments in terms of how do we deliver elections in the UK? Should we not be looking at changing the way we do things to make it more efficient? But that's, again, a bigger argument that will end up having to be debated by those who make the decisions in terms of legislation.
Well, I think someone who would agree with you on the point that you just made about the importance of democracy is Vijay Rangarajan, who is the chief executive of the Electoral Commission, so the elections watchdog. And he's made a very strong statement about the government's decision to give this option of delaying to councils. So what did you make of his statement?
It's a very strong statement from the Commission, probably one of the strongest ones that I've seen during my workings with the Commission. But I think what Vijay has said is touching on a lot of the real challenges around the fact that we expect elections to take place. A good democracy will have elections. There are these mitigating circumstances that, as we've talked about previously, it's been left to local authorities to make their case to the Secretary of State. I mean, let's be absolutely clear, it will still be the Secretary of State making that decision, but the evidence has to be provided as to justify a reason for delay. But, as I say, I think generally we're very supportive of the fact that elections should only be deferred in exceptional circumstances. And in the past, that's been because of foot and mouth disease, because of COVID, because of lots of external factors that did affect elections. is it the case that reorganisation of local government is justifiably at the same level? Commission clearly feel no. We can understand why, but I think we would lean on the side of, the Commission have said it pretty well there, that there are concerns because of the legitimacy of the electoral process.
Okay, and do you think that's particularly the case for the sort of councils which have already had delays to their elections last year? So, for example, Essex County Council, it last held its local elections in 2021. They were meant to go ahead in May 2025, but they were delayed. They could be delayed again, although Essex County Council has said it won't be asking for a delay this time. But it means that in some seats, potentially councillors will have been sitting for 6 years without facing re-election.
That's a concern because the basic premise is his 4-year term of office. Obviously, Parliament is longer than that, as at the will of the Prime Minister now. But it's 4 years. And in the case that you've quoted, it's not the only county council in that particular scenario. 6-7 years is an awful long time between the two electoral processes. Now, that is the debate, the argument, the points being made by those who are averse to the delays, because it is about the democratic legitimacy of the people being elected to that particular body. I think we will fall on that side of the fence because we do feel there needs to be that refresh of making sure that local councils do represent the areas that they've been elected to. So there is a massive concern if it goes on for too long. Maybe 5 years, yeah. Beyond that, you begin to wonder, should it take place in any case?
Okay. And thinking about this timeline for local council reorganisation, so in Surrey there's an accelerated timeline, but in the other areas where this is happening, so I think there are 204 councils which are included in this local government reorganisation. They're supposed to be operational, the unitary councils, by April 2028, and the expectation is that there would be an election held in May 2027 to decide who will be on those councils effectively. But that does mean that if elections are held in 2026, people are only going to be sitting for, say, a year before they're looking to be re-elected again. So do you think that there is this argument that it's just sensible to wait rather than...
I can understand the argument, but I'd also make a suggestion that the scenario you gave is only as a result of reorganisation. If the reorganisation didn't take place, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. So I think it's one of the byproducts of the fact that the decision has been made to simplify the local government network, positively, negatively. That's another argument that would be being played out and has been played out in the House of Commons. But I think the bottom line is that there will never be an easy transition from one system to another. There will always be the element. So the debate is, do you have a 1-year elected period or do you have a 7-year elected period? I think, at the end of the day, the world is fast moving. It's probably better to have a shorter period than it is a longer period. It also maintains the knowledge of the electorate in how they participate in that electoral process, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of concentration on UK parliamentary general elections. Well, actually, there's lots of other elections in between as well that actually mean that voters are able to participate and engage with the state at the various different levels that are there.
So from your perspective, you think that it's important for elections to go ahead because that defends democracy and this idea that councillors will only be sitting for a certain term and then there will be an election again and you need to give them that mandate from the people?
On a very simple basis, yes. But you have to balance that against, are the costs prohibitive? Sorry, I can't even say the word now. That will make that more difficult to go forward. So, but going back to the statement made by the Commission, it's about what's right in democracy. What is the right thing to do in terms of maintaining that trust between the state, if we want to put it in that broad context, and the electorate? At what point does that get stretched and then broken in terms of the trust between those particular bodies?
Okay, and do you have any closing thought on this topic? Is there anything you'd like listeners to take away?
I think it's just those who've heard me speak before about the whole elections process. It's about the certainty. I think everybody's crying out for the decisions to be made clearly and quickly, so that actually we can get on with either delivering the elections or pulling back for whatever length of period it will be that's there. We know the 15th of January deadline is coming forwards. decision need to be made very quickly. And we understand that orders for delays will need to be in place, I think, at the latest early February, in time for the to prevent the elections taking place. Because, as I say, notice of election kicks off on the 30th of March. So it's really about, from any local government official, it's about give us the certainty and we will deliver, whether that's a positive, we are running elections, or a negative that says, no, we're not. I don't mean that's a positive negative, but in terms of, yes, we are going ahead, or no, we're not. Because at the moment, there's still that level of confusion as to whether the work needs to be done to make sure that people can go to the ballot box on the 7th of May.
Just on that, how much work does go into preparing for an election? So how many months ahead of an election would you like to know that it's definitely going ahead, and when would the work on that election begin for administration?
Some of the listeners to the podcast will have heard of the Gould principle, and this came out of the Scottish referendum some years ago, where Sir Ron Gould, who undertook an inquiry, said no changes should be made to electoral law within 6 months of the election. So in terms of preparations for an election, there'll be the electoral registration canvass that takes place through the autumn for the following May elections. Work commences on elections at the latest on the 1st of December of the year before, so a 6-month leading period to that process. So in the areas, even where the local authorities have come out and said we don't want to run elections, work will still have been done to make sure the polling stations are in place, provisional bookings on count venues, just warning the staff they might be needed, unlikely, but there's a chance. So it becomes more difficult for those particular areas. Those areas where there's a complete uncertainty, they are going full guns blazing in terms of they're expecting to run an election. And as happened last year, quite late in the day, they may need to pull the plug and say, OK, guys, we don't need the polling station, we don't need the count venues, don't need the staff, turn off the contracts with printers, things like that. Going forward. So I think it's that certainty element about whether or not the election is taking place, regardless of whether it's positive or negative decisions being made by local authorities going forwards.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time, Peter. That's all been very interesting.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to Observations, and I've been your host, Lily Russell-Jones. If you want to share your views on anything that we've discussed in today's episode, or you're concerned about election delays in your local area, get in touch with us over email. You can find us on observations.podcast@democracyvolunteers.org, or leave us a comment on YouTube. You can find us at Observations Podcast with no spaces. That's all from me. Thank you so much for listening.
The Observations podcast is being brought to you by Democracy Volunteers, the UK's leading election observation group. Democracy Volunteers is non-partisan and does not necessarily share the opinions of participants in the podcast. It brings the podcast to you to improve knowledge of elections, both national and international.